I just want to touch on a few points over the next few minutes, and I want to start with firefighters, Mr. Speaker. We've had numerous pieces of or different resolutions go through with regards to firefighters and the great work that they continue to do and have done over the years. And the area of Hants West is certainly no exception. We have a number of fire departments and firefighters in our area. Somerville Fire Department hosts a number of members day and night, always there when you need them. Much work going on in that area down there, whether it's a fish supper they hold down there every once in a while, generally once a month or every other month, raising funds to continue purchasing vehicles. They have a jam session down there that brings numerous people out. Again, volunteers taking part in organizing all of these things, Mr. Speaker. We move up to Brooklyn, another great fire service. Many firefighters there. Mutual aid departments helping and assisting the different areas. Windsor Fire Department, Windsor Station 2 Fire Department, numerous members, the chiefs. With the exception of the Windsor Fire Department now, all of the chiefs, all of the members are volunteers in that department and have been some for 30, 40, 50 years. Walter Stevens, a former chief in the town of Windsor, I can't remember just how many years, 50 or 60 years, Mr. Speaker, that gentleman gave to his community. In the town of Windsor and the municipality West Hants, for which they serviced. 65 members in the town of Windsor Fire Station, all volunteers, as I said, with the exception of the chief now, who also was a volunteer member for well over 30 plus years, Mr. Speaker. And those deeds cannot go unrecognized. We move to Hantsport. Again, numerous volunteers in Hantsport with regards to the fire service. A good example this year in January, they do an annual. I believe this January was the 7th annual food drive. Something like a couple of tons of food gathered on a rainy, wet, damp day in January. But the people, spirits not deterred whatsoever, out there in the rain, gathering food. An annual drive, and that's to be commended as well, Mr. Speaker. All of these departments putting on breakfasts, fundraisers, anything and everything to help out communities, to raise money for those facilities, and to continue, the purchasing of trucks, the purchasing of equipment, to continue the good service to the municipalities of West Hants, of the town of Windsor, of the town of Hantsport. Again, I want to say that that service just is exceptional, and we're grateful for that service and those people. And as you know, in our budget this year, Mr. Speaker, we've put forward an excellent tax measure that recognizes the essential service of firefighters, Mr. Speaker, here in Nova Scotia and in all of our communities, Mr. Speaker. We have, so many different groups, Mr. Speaker. We have the Rotary Club. We have the Lions Club. There'll be some I forget. There's no question, or I'll miss. Not intentionally, that's for sure. Cancer Society. I believe March may be the month we'll see these folks knocking on our doors. Again, never ending. Year after year after year, we go to annual receptions for these volunteers and awards, and you see the same people, and it's just the dedication, and you can see many, many people for many years taking part, whether it's heart and stroke. Again, the same thing, out knocking on our doors. February, cold month, they're still there, Mr. Speaker, they're still there. Many of these folks, Mr. Speaker, they never complain. You never hear it. It doesn't matter what the issue is. It's what can we do to help the organization we're involved with, Mr. Speaker. One rather interesting one, and the Honourable Member for Annapolis spoke to it a few minutes ago. He touched on this with regards to the schools, is the breakfast programs. We know in numerous schools across this province, breakfast programs are run. And who are they run by? Of course, they're run by the volunteers, the parents. And enough cannot be said about that. There's nothing more appetizing, I guess, for lack of a better word, than having a full belly in the morning for our children, starting off their day when they are learning. And again, that's volunteer support, providing that in most cases. I know certainly in our area it is. And it's not just the breakfast programs, it's the after-school programs. There's teacher involvement, but there's volunteer support there as well from the parents and members of our communities, whether it's the basketball games they're traveling our children around this province to, or whether it's the hockey games. Mr. Speaker, all of our schools have these, all of our communities, generally speaking, have minor hockey teams. Just as an example, Mr. Speaker, Huey Maynard, fine example, a gentleman who coached hockey from when I was just a kid, joined minor hockey, played with his son. I was fortunate enough to have Huey as a coach for a number of years as we grew up and went along in the different age groups through band and pee-wee, midget, etc., and some rep team, and that meant traveling around this province, Mr. Speaker, and people like Huey Maynard are the people who've transferred us around. He's just one name that comes to mind, and there were many on every weekend, a weekend whether we were in Yarmouth, a weekend in Pictou County, down in the Honourable Colleague area down there, and I know he's spent a lot of time as well coaching, and he knows what that's like. We all know what that's like to have community volunteers, and it doesn't matter if it's hockey. Same with baseball in the summertime. Dave Schenkel, great guy. He's been on the ball field that I can recall in Windsor for I don't know how many years. I almost hate to mention the number. It's been that many years. Unfortunately, I am getting up there, and I remember Dave coaching when I was a little bit younger, and now is coaching my kids in the baseball and the, I don't know what you call it, the minor baseball league has got a name now in different levels of, for the children. T-ball, thank you very much. T-ball there now, and my kids all play T-ball, and who was there every summer, faithfully? Dave Schenkel, Fred Rogers, the same names keep coming. Dave Pemberton spent many years there, as my honourable colleague across the way would certainly be familiar with these names, and others, many others. I'm sure that he would recognize any of those names. Again, it's the traveling around. How are we getting there on Saturday? You know, Dave Schenkel's got a car. We're loading up in the car, and we're heading to Sackville maybe to play our game, or down the valley, more popular spot for us in the Valley League, heading to Kempville, Neminas, and playing. The same with hockey, as I mentioned. You know, you jump in the same and Huey's truck, and off we go and travel around this province. Those people have come, they've done their time, and we see new people coming now, putting that time in. It's great to see the evolution of volunteers. It's something that this province needs to be proud of. We just can't say enough. You know, all of us members in this House have an opportunity to travel throughout our constituencies. We travel around and we go to breakfast. We meet people. We meet people traveling around on the weekends and through the evenings, etc. And I know I'm running out of time, and I could talk for hours on this subject, as I'm sure any of us could, recognizing the great people. We go to Belmont every month, first Saturday of every month. I'd invite any of you that were there to come down and support that great community hall. They've done wonders down there. It's amazing how many volunteers that one little community can produce, just to operate the hall and keep it up, and new windows and new doors, etc., and the other things that services don't provide. Bowling on Saturday mornings. You know, my kids go bowling on Saturday morning. Great turnout for bowling Saturday morning. The youth league there, who supports that? The Windsor Bowling Center is owned and operated by Wayne and Brenda Mason. Well, I'm sure my honourable colleague would also recognize those names. And many volunteers, Kenny Keogh, Valerie Siri, take part. The numerous coaches, 2 levels, in the morning, the younger, and as we move through the morning and into the afternoon, the older group. Again, what a commitment. These people drive around the province, Port Hawkesbury, all over, doing provincials, whether we're coming to Dartmouth. It doesn't matter. Again, volunteerism, it's amazing in the community of Hants West. Just amazing. And I'm sure, and I know it is, in other areas. We spoke briefly a little earlier, the Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage touched on heritage sites in this province. Our heritage societies, those are volunteer groups, planning members that come and they decide what's going to take place. A lot of time is put in. Those folks need to be recognized as well. And touching on that subject of heritage, it would be a shame to see that taken away from them, the work that they've put in without some of the things that we spoke to a little bit earlier today, without that consultation. It would be a shame if they weren't involved in decisions that would be made to change anything in this province with regards to heritage sites. I know I was on council for 2 years in the town of Windsor prior to being elected last June, and it was an honor to be part of the heritage committee there and work with people from the community, with former councillors, or fellow councillors I should say. And I'm told, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, my time is up, and I do want to say they can give me my time. Well, I won't take that from them. Again, I thank you very much, and I just can't say enough about the seniors in our area. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm always pleased to stand in the legislature and talk about the wonderful contributions from our many volunteers in this province. But I cannot reflect upon their many contributions without recognizing that this is a resource sector that's in crisis. And I think the lack of leadership coming from the government side of the House is something that we need to be very, very concerned about in regard to the voluntary sector. While I recognize that a number of volunteers are called such, they're informal volunteers because they work informally. They're not connected with organizations within our province. And they're good neighbors, they're good friends, and they do help one another out. But when I'm talking about the voluntary sector, I'm talking about volunteers that work through community organizations, service groups, community agencies, and other levels of activity in our communities. And I don't think anyone in this chamber would be surprised to find out that 1 in every 3 Nova Scotians is a volunteer in this province. But what is a bit scary is the fact that, that only 25% of them contribute about 73% of the voluntary effort in this province, because that suggests that that sector is quite vulnerable to a loss of volunteers. And that's the trend that's happening across Canada. Everywhere outside of Atlantic Canada, the number of people volunteering in our communities is decreasing. And that's going to be a fact of life here in Nova Scotia as well. The only reason our numbers are artificially kept high is because of the increasing number of what I'm calling informal volunteers, people just being good neighbors and good friends and helping out within their family. Part of the reason that our voluntary sector is disappointed because they've been looking to this government for leadership are a couple of the promises in the last provincial campaign. And I just want to remind my colleagues opposite that 2 of their campaign promises were, 1, to eliminate the need for not-for-profit groups and organizations to have to buy insurance when they use school buildings for recreational and community events. We haven't seen any evidence of that being carried forward. Also, there was a promise to look at recommendations from the Canada-Nova Scotia Volunteerism Initiative Network, which I'm proud to say I helped to bring to this province in my previous life. One of the Conservative promises was to develop volunteer resource centres to help support the many community groups across our province. I haven't seen any evidence yet that that is in the making either. Part of the reason that our voluntary sector organizations are so busy these days, Mr. Speaker, is because they are trying to fill the gap, the program and service gap created by the provincial government. There are a number of activities very necessary to the survival and safety and health and education of people living across Nova Scotia that are not being picked up by this government. Those responsibilities are being downloaded to the community, to families, and to community organizations. I take, for example, the women's centres across Nova Scotia. There's a huge increased demand on their services, resulting partly because the inadequate level of income that many of these women live on, also because of the risk of violence at home and in their communities, the lack of educational and skills and training opportunities within their rural communities. So they are creating a huge flood of entrance into the women's centres. And the women's centres are not getting the additional money that they need to create the programs and services needed to meet the needs of this increased clientele. And so they're having to go to community organizations, service groups within their communities, and asking for funding that they can redirect to the women who are using the women's centres. So I just want to take, for example, during the Forum on Poverty, the second one that we just held in February in the Red Room, we heard a very eloquent speaker from the Antigonish Women's Centre. And she mentioned that the, I think it was the Lions Club in Antigonish, sorry, the Kinsman Club in Antigonish, actually had contributed over $25,000 to help with the emergency needs of the women and children coming through their center. This isn't to help with the operations or the programming of the Women's Center, but this is to meet some of the day-to-day financial needs of the women and children who have come to the Women's Center. So this shows the ripple effect of, first of all, inadequate incomes for women in particular, but also people on disability and people in social assistance in this province. It's showing the inadequate core funding for a lot of the community organizations and agencies who are actually performing the mandated responsibilities of various government departments, and just showing the ripple effect. The increased workload for the women's centers are spilling over into increased financial demands on the charities and service organizations within that community. There's also the risk of burnout. When you have a small proportion of your volunteers providing most of the donations and providing most of the work hours, as that volunteer group ages, they are at risk of burnout or moving on to other things. Again, I just want to mention that sometimes, because there's not a gender lens put on some of the policy development and legislation created by government, sometimes people don't realize that public policy is not neutral. It has a different impact on men than women. I spent 15 years before I was elected working in the voluntary sector in rural Nova Scotia, and it was amazing how many older women in particular were staying home to look after loved ones who had been released early from hospital or who had gone in for day surgery, or they were babysitting grandchildren because there was no nonprofit affordable childcare in their community. They were being pulled out of the voluntary sector, out of those community organizations, and that was really creating a lot of stress for the volunteer activity in their community. Add to that out-migration, where you have a couple of generations of younger members of the community and families actually missing to a large extent in those communities. You can see the cumulative effect of many of the misguided policies and lack of focus of the government in terms of what they do in terms of their policy development, how that impacts down the road on the communities and on the families. So I just want to say that unless this government gets very serious about protecting the natural resource, which is our voluntary sector, we are going to lose the equivalent of 25,000 jobs in this province. And this would have a serious impact on our quality of life and on the activities, especially in rural Nova Scotia. So while I am pleased to give recognition to the wonderful efforts of the volunteers across our province, I do want to urge the government to take seriously the concerns of the voluntary sector, because if that collapses, it's going to be just as bad as if the physical infrastructure in our communities collapses. The social infrastructure is provided by our voluntary sector and the 250,000 people who volunteer across Nova Scotia, and we have to protect that, and we have to allow them to continue the good work that they're doing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise this evening and to speak to this matter, and I want to congratulate the member from Hants West on bringing this matter forward tonight. It's a matter that I think we all can agree with, and one that everybody in Nova Scotia realizes that how would government provide all the services that people require today without the services of volunteers throughout Nova Scotia in many areas of our community, in many facets of our daily life. A couple of personal observations that I would like to tell you, Mr. Speaker, and members of the House about volunteers involves my wife Anne and the CIBC Run for the Cure in Sydney. As you know, most members were attending the cancer breakfast this morning at Nova Scotia Cancer Society, and heard about the tremendous efforts that are being made to provide drugs to people who have been afflicted with cancer. And I can tell you that in the Run for the Cure program in my area, the Cape Breton area, the CIBC Run for the Cure, that one just has to witness what's going on there and what happens with the literally hundreds of volunteers that come out, not only on that day for the run, but all the preparation work that goes into it for the entire year. And I can tell you that I know firsthand, the fact that my wife is the chairman, that she spends a great deal of time, but so do the committee, on that. And last year they raised in excess of, I believe, $400 and some odd thousand for the CIBC, and that happens right across Canada, you know, and it happens up here in Metro, and it happens down in the Valley, and it's a labor of love. It really is, for those people who are volunteer, and almost every one of them knows somebody that's touched by cancer, that cancer has touched, and to see some of the teams that get together and the kind of organization they put into it for the year, for the one common purpose, to try to eradicate breast cancer in women. And it's just something that you just have to see and be part of to believe the kind of work that's being done there. So I want to congratulate all the volunteers in the CIBC Run for the Cure, starting with Ann McDonald and all the other volunteers that make a difference in the Run for the Cure, and perhaps someday breast cancer among women will be a thing of the past. Let's hope so. I also want to talk about a friend of mine in our area that his name was Cowboy Jim Euro, and he was a volunteer for many, many years. Cowboy Jim was born mentally challenged and never went to school, but he used to hang around the Sydney Forum at a young age, and started getting involved with ticket selling and that while we were playing hockey. A bunch of us who were affectionately known as rink rats, and hung around the Forum from the time we could walk. And Cowboy was always there, and he was selling tickets all the time for every organization that would ask him. And Cowboy had a unique way of selling tickets. If the ticket was $1 and you gave him 20, you never got any change. Whatever you gave him, it went to the organization that he was selling the tickets for. But he was the kind of volunteer that endeared himself to everybody in the community, because organizations would go to him with tickets and ask if he'd sell these tickets for this organization, and he would say yes. And I can recall a couple of incidents that come to mind when I was mayor in Sydney in I believe it was 1980, that Governor General Ed Schreier and his wife Lily came to Sydney. And there was an event, of course, at the Civic Center with all kinds of hoopla and bands and security people all over the place. And the limousine pulls up with the Governor General, and of course I'm there, and my children are there, and who comes trotting across the walkway there but Cowboy Jim with a bunch of tickets in his hand. And of course the security people were getting all out of sorts there, you know, and I just put my hand up and said, no, he's okay. So he gets over right next to me. And he's standing there, and he's still got the tickets in his hand. And I'm saying, Cowboy, you're not going to try to sell the Governor General the ticket. Uh-huh. He says, uh-huh. You know, so anyway, I said, no, don't do that. He said, who he? You know, and I said, he's the Governor General, you know. So this is the way Cowboy used to talk. So he wasn't impressed, but he was still saying to me, you know, can I sell him a ticket? Because he wanted to sell him a ticket, because he knew he probably had money, because he was all dressed up, you know. But anyway, Cowboy would do that, and in that particular day, by the way, he didn't sell him a ticket, but the Governor General took the time to talk to him and asked him about his ticket-selling activities, which Cowboy was impressed, but not too impressed, because Cowboy Jim could be at home with paupers or kings. It didn't make any difference. He treated them all the same, you know, and everybody in our community knew and loved him, but not only for the kind of character he was, but the kind of volunteer he was for different organizations. So those are the kinds of things you remember over the years, and I think people remembered more about that event, the fact that Cowboy was asking who Governor General Schreier was, and everybody in the audience knew who Cowboy Jim was that day. And before Governor General Schreier left, he knew who Cowboy Jim was too. You know? But I just want to say that it was mentioned earlier about firefighters, and volunteer firefighters and service clubs in our community and all communities throughout Nova Scotia play a very important role in our daily lives. And I think of a few that come to mind that I'm aware of, and the volunteers that sometimes don't get public recognition, but the volunteers who nevertheless perform a very important service. And one of the things that come to mind is the tremendous number of volunteers who, certainly in a labor of love, spend time in the palliative care program for people in our community. Now, there's not much publicity in that, there's not much fanfare around it because nobody likes to talk about palliative care. But the kind of work that those volunteers in our community and every community in Nova Scotia do in regards to those who are terminally ill is something to behold. Making their quality of life better in their last days, and that to me is truly a labor of love. And there are all kinds of people in our community that are doing that, all kinds of people. And there are people that expect nothing more than to make life easier for those who have limited life left, and so to the volunteers in the palliative care program, they deserve our undying thanks for sure. And there's others volunteers that volunteer on Meals and Wheels programs every day for seniors, or they volunteer to go and sit with seniors, or they volunteer to go to seniors clubs with recreation activities. And all of these people, and we all know who they are in our communities, they don't expect anything out of it except that they get the satisfaction that they're helping their fellow citizens, and that they're performing a role that they get personal satisfaction out of as well. And I believe that we here in Nova Scotia are blessed with those kinds of volunteers that are in abundance. And thank heavens they are in abundance, because, as I said at the outset, how would this government, or any government of whatever political stripe, cope with the many demands of Nova Scotians and the many needs out there unless they had a huge volunteer sector? There's not enough money in anybody's treasury to do all of that from the public purse. And we are extremely fortunate here in Nova Scotia to have volunteers who don't ask for any recognition other than the ability to be able to perform a service on behalf of their fellow citizens. In our community and in all communities that I know throughout Nova Scotia, and that every member in this House knows the people in their community. And, every once in a while we should just stop and say hello to these people and thank them for the work they do in their community, because they do perform a role that government can't really perform. Because it's a personal role, it's a one-on-one type of situation in a lot of cases. And, Mr. Speaker, I'll end up by saying that, again, if you could stand at Victoria Park in October and watch the CIBC Run for the Cure volunteers, they're there all day with their T-shirts on, celebrating the people that they've known over the years that fell victim to cancer and have since passed away. And they're there raising money so that perhaps in the future there won't be any more people in our community or any other community in Nova Scotia succumbing to that horrible disease called breast cancer. And that is certainly something that these people believe will happen if they get out there and they keep raising money and putting money into the program in order to extend the research necessary to perhaps come up with a cure for breast cancer. And I want to congratulate certainly my wife as the chair for the past couple of years, and all the volunteers, hundreds of them in the Sydney area that are involved in this every year. And I know that I speak for every member of this House when they are so proud of the volunteers in their own community. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I would like to thank all the honourable members for having taken part in tonight's late debate. Motion for adjournment has been made. We stand adjourned until 12 noon tomorrow.